Get on for so long, I can't believe it. His name is James Miller, and he's going to tell us about something that he just did recently, which has now gone through other people to the Supreme Court. And also on the show is Michael McKibben. Welcome, James. Welcome, Michael.
Good morning.
Good morning.
It is revolutionary. When the two of you came up with the idea of doing a writ of mandamus to demand that there be a chain of custody, a bipartisan chain of custody, that there be paper backup for the election so that you can't just count on digitized machines which can be manipulated. And in some suggestions, I think the two of you said, ink the thumb so you don't get to vote twice, and other such things. But your writ of mandamus, you really put out a tremendous effort, James, as we looked at it as you went along. And of course, we gave you our advice, especially Michael and his crew of people who know all about legal situations. And you filed this, I believe, in the state of Washington, and you had a tremendously stupid reaction from the state. In fact, they said to you, "Oh, it's very nice you filed. We're going to consider this after the election." Now, I may have that wrong, and that's why we want to talk with you today. Tell us about this writ of mandamus that you filed. Tell us how important it is for this upcoming election and for all elections. What do you have to tell us about this amazing effort that you've put out?
So this idea of the writ, I came out of the research on the election machines just out of the total curiosity of, because if a person does any research on election machines on the internet, everything is fraught with bad press, with the machines that fail. It's just didn't seem like a really good process, and process is what I did for the Boeing company, and it just when you do something for the airplane, processes have to be really good and forthright. They're well considered, and they're statistically highly probable of being successful. But every time you looked at the election process, it just never seemed to be a good process. And
hey, Jim, I just flew recently, and I really am glad that you were on the job in quality processes for a Boeing plane.
Yeah, well, those Boeing puts out an amazing product. If people only knew how diligent the engineers and everyone is, and it's such a culture of safety, and you don't realize it until you get on an airplane, especially if you're in a storm or have a bad landing that turns out really good, because that airplane and those processes are so highly regarded that when you land and you say, "Wow, that's really glad that Boeing built an airplane." So I'm as passionate about our governance and our government and things working properly, especially in the justice system, as a person would be building a really good product. And as it turned out in our research, the more that we dug into this with Michael, and the worse it got. The more that you researched it, and finally it just turned into it's really a nightmare that our freedom, our self-governance, it's called the right to suffrage, or the right to vote, for people in a constitutional republic to elect the people that they feel will do the best job for them, and do that freely without interference. Our Constitution of Washington State, Article 1, Section 19, says that no civil or military interference will occur in the right to suffrage. But in my discovery of writing for public records requests with our local county, with our auditor, everything boils down to, with every avenue that you go to, with every request, it all boils down to a state secret. They can't tell you what's going on. They can't tell you how the computers work. They can't tell you how the software is maintained. They tell you that they have statistical things in place, but when we examine those statistical processes, we just find big holes that you can drive semis through. And so I was really not confident at all with the process. So I wrote a writ of mandamus. We discovered that a citizen, if they're willing to step up and pay the filing fees, and you actually get the right court the first time. I filed this in the county court the first time. That was wrong. and so we refiled it with the state Supreme Court. A citizen actually has the right to compel the federal or the state bureaucracy and the elected representatives to do their job according to the Constitution. So that's how the writ came about. That's what we did. I did have hope in the beginning that the state would, that this would cause or change the election process, but they kept delaying it until after the election. And then I received from one of the Supreme Court commissioners that they wouldn't consider it at all because I didn't compel the state. I didn't give them any room to move or any direction or any way to actually functionally respond, which is not true at all. They could have simply not used election machines and hand counted them. That would have been one first step, but they ignored everything and basically said that I didn't have a case. It wasn't filed really properly, which we don't believe is true. So that's where we stand. So how do I feel about all of the effort, the months and months of work? I would do it again because it is a milestone. It tells, the research itself was a really quite the education process, and it tells us that we have an incredible amount of work to do to really take back from a self-governance perspective the right to suffrage and to actually have an election process where mischief hasn't been baked into it by the use of technology. So I'm very happy to have done that. I would do it again. We will be pursuing this, probably putting together an initiative and to continue educating people that high technology or technology for the sake of convenience has no value at all compared to the freedoms and the mischief that is available through the use of technology. We just think some things are meant to be kept as simple as possible for safety reasons, and what we are protecting is actually the freedom of our republic, of the citizens in the republic, to be properly represented. And the state, against its own constitution, has interfered in that process and has turned the right to suffrage into a state secret, which is actually against the law, but they don't recognize it. They say they have a statistical process in place that protects the citizens. We disagree with that. So that's kind of the background and the story of the writ.
Well, James, what you did, Truth News Headlines, and I believe Americans for Innovation and other groups spread out through the internet. And then, I think 2 days ago, we found out, because we had asked everyone, do the same in your state. Do everything you can. Take legal action if you know how to take legal action, because we have already proven to you that the elections are rigged, and here is how they are rigged. And these, it is not a proper chain of custody. It is the machines can be hacked, so on and so forth. But what happened 2 days ago? Someone, unbeknownst to us, filed with the Supreme Court, Homeland Security, and with Vice President Pence's Committee for Ethics in Elections, a writ of, do you say mandamus? Is that how you say it?
Yes.
Okay, mandamus. I was saying it wrong, sorry. The writ of mandamus was filed with the Supreme Court. I just called there and I spoke with someone, and I called also Homeland Security, and these things are moving forward. This is not a joke. And we looked at the writ that was filed, and it's absolutely magnificent. It built upon what you did, and then it gives all the evidence to show that the election was rigged. So what you did set a fire, and that fire has now gone straight to the Supreme Court and Homeland Security, who is in charge of the election. So we have, with your help, and because someone took legal action, someone that Michael McKibben knew, someone I've spoken to before, his name is Christopher Strunk, and a lawyer that he works with, Harold Van Allen, they have filed, and it's taking yet the next step. So all your good efforts, in a way, you handed the baton on to them, perhaps unknowingly, and we don't know how many other people have taken this baton that you've created and where they're going with it. Now, can you explain for some of us what it was that you found was improper in the election in detail, so that gave you the reason and justification to file the writ to begin with?
Well, it's a long story. We looked at what is called bipartisan chain of custody. Bipartisan chain of custody is actually a criminal definition in Washington State, but I think across the nation. In that, in a criminal case, any evidence that is tampered with or altered, either by the prosecuting attorney or the defense attorney, in that process, if they lose control of that, then that evidence is tainted and has to be thrown out. It can't be considered in the case. So if it's part of the prosecuting attorney's case, and this just happened, and I was working with a person or two people who were actually falsely accused, so this is part of how this came out. And the evidence, the criminal evidence, or the chain of custody of that evidence was in fact tainted, and they threw it out, and the people who were falsely accused had to be let go. The ballot is actually chain of custody. I mean, it is evident that a voter has voted. If it's criminally defined, in Washington State, when you mail in your ballot, you actually lose control of it. You are not in a polling place where you sign in, show your ID, walk into a booth, fill out a paper ballot, not a machine. In the real world, in the future that we would like, and that we would like to see like it used to be done, Citizen A goes in, fills out their ballot, and they walk over and they drop it into a box that is watched by a group of citizens and who are participating in this process as volunteers. So you have chain of custody from the time that ballot leaves the hand of the person, goes into a place that's watched under bipartisan control. Then the ballots are taken from that box when the box is full or whatever the criteria are. Then they're counted under control, and you could have video cameras. There's just dozens of processes that you could put in place that maintain this chain of custody. But in Washington State, when you mail that ballot in, as soon as you put it in the mailbox, you've actually lost control of it. There are dozens of ways that it can be intercepted. Now, even though when you register to vote here, you sign your signature, and when they compare the signature on the outer envelope that contains your secret ballot, there are ways that can be tricked. It's also that evidence is not under the control of the person who filled out the ballot. So we feel that bipartisan chain of custody has not been maintained, and since the definition, it actually invalidates that ballot. That's our interpretation. The state, of course, disagrees with that, but that's the main point of why we should just have a polling place paper ballot without any machine. The other part of it is I asked for all of the information of how the ballot, when it's scanned. The horror of the whole process was when I learned that the mail-in ballots in Washington State, and this may be true in other places, they use scanners to count. And there is no human tally taken. So it's all from the machine, and the machine prints out a report that is then taken from a memory device and put into a computer, a tally computer, and that tally uses a report. That report then, or that same memory device, is sent to the state, and it prints out the same report, so it becomes self-validating. There is no human in Washington State election process. There is no human tally taken. So when we found that out, and the state would not give me information on how that works because it was a state secret, that's when I knew that I had to do something. So that's the background story for it. Yeah.
Well, Jim, didn't you tell me that the state secret issue was they claimed it was a state secret or was secret because the vendors that they used for those scanners claimed it was their secret and they wouldn't give it up, right?
That is correct. And for me to engage, I could get a Superior Court judge to override that. But if that vendor had to defend itself, they would charge me at their rates of $400 an hour to write their defense, and I would be liable for that cost. So, of course, I didn't go down that path. But in essence, the state has a secret, and they won't tell the citizens how the machinery works.
Governed by the vendor.
Governed by the vendor.
You got a vendor list, didn't you, of those machines?
Correct. There are about 11 different vendors in the state of Washington, but they all use exactly the same scanning technology called Optech. And it's an OCR, optical character recognition technology developed decades ago, but it's been changed and designed for counting these ballots. And it's real curious that the same week that I filed my writ, the county of Okanagan, where I live, had the Optech scanner machines malfunctioned, were getting spurious results that a sample produced that the machines had to be repaired. They had to stop, get a repair done to the software and the machines, and then start over. I thought it was serendipitous that the very day that I filed my writ, the machines broke down.
And we're seeing that in other states too, James. We're seeing that they say, oh, it's okay. These Hart InterCivic machines, they were certified in 2002. They're fine. They were certified in 2009. And who were they certified by? Oh, if they were those machines I just mentioned, they were certified by Mitt Romney's son. 17 states run his voting machines. And Optech that you mentioned, what I want, gentlemen, is for you to clarify just for me and for our audience also. When the serious research started to go down on the machines that were being used for the elections, and James, you got involved looking at, through the Center of Self-Governance kind of thinking, what you were just describing a minute ago, the proper value of suffrage in this country and the way that it's supposed to be handled and the way it's really a sacred right of a citizen that needs to be guarded by the citizens, not by the federal government, and certainly not by Mitt Romney and his son Tag, or by the people who own Diebold or the people who own ES&S. So we did these great research projects, went very deep, and went all the way back to the 70s, and found that it was Jimmy Carter working with the CIA in Venezuela, and that's when we got connected to who you told us about, in passing in a way, Lord Mark Malloch Brown, who we now understand has been rigging elections through many countries for decades and decades. So who was it that really started this, Michael McKibben? I don't remember. Was it James jumped on the research, or you jumped on what he had discovered, or how did this really get started?
It was probably in just general conversation. The Center for Self-Governance has a number of their leaders out near Jim. And so we were probably just talking about citizens' rights and the legal issues behind voting machines. And of course, both of us being computer software guys, we know that software is easily hackable, and because it's not seen, it can't possibly guarantee a clean vote. So we both knew that just as general technology guys. So the fact that these different secretaries of state were striving so hard to protect this mechanism of electronic voting, it's almost like they were just so impressed by these shiny things they couldn't think of anything else. But as we dug more into that, it became clear that there was an agenda here, and that's when Jim really started using his skills to take that process apart in the state of Washington. And I mean, from an engineering viewpoint, that system out there is there's no word to describe how horribly broken it is.
Well, I have to thank you, James, because it was your discovery about Lord Malloch Brown that just sent us crazy. And now we have just dug in so deep that there is no one with a intelligence at all that cannot see that our elections are rigged. And they are so rigged, and it comes out of Britain. It comes literally out of the British Privy Council around the Queen. But this group of Privy Council members, they're the major propagandists in the world. They have controlled elections in these ways because Optech was it runs every single voting machine in America, and that software is ancient. It can be hacked by PC anywhere by a junior high school student. The election machines can be hacked, as they recently did at a conference called DEF CON, where they had literally junior high school students hack every one of the machines, and literally within minutes. That's how easily why are we even using them? How could anyone, we citizens don't know that it's our right to say, sorry, we don't want those machines. Get rid of all of them, and by the way, put the people in jail who owned them, because they have been rigging elections since these machines were brought forward, like with the Diebold machines in Ohio.
No, that's true. If we citizens don't step up and take our vote back. The onus is on us to do this. The government will not do it, and that's what Jim just found. We need to take charge of that and just basically walk in and say, no, this is the citizens' activity. This is not a state activity, which is an amazing thought that we have to assume our right.
It is. And when we think about this, James, what you have done is the proper legal way to do it. And then you saw the shenanigans in what I call fake justice in the court system manipulate you. Because why? You don't have enough money to turn it in the right form. You don't have a lawyer who has the right suit on. You don't have insider connections that told the judge what to do before the judge walked in the courtroom. So what we found out is that was a response in one state. And we'll go back to the corruption in just a minute. But I wanted to know, I was shocked when I saw this went to the Supreme Court. You should have seen Betsy and her team. I thought we had just won the Super Bowl or something. And I'm like, I don't understand. I'm like the last one who understood what really happened. I think only, very much later I said, oh, well, no matter what, this is a great thing. This is a patriot movement from the grassroots up that shows that if you take the right legal action in the right legal order and you suffer through, because you two have suffered through court, especially you, Michael, court shenanigans that are beyond anything anyone can imagine, that is the right way to do it. So what do you think, James?
Jim just got treated with judicial nonsense.
Exactly.
Typical procedural nonsense. It's why our system is so broken. They have a bevy of 5,000 different reasons why not to do something, and all he did was pull out a couple, or he or she, I don't know if it's a man or a woman, but they just pulled out a couple and threw it at him and just petted him on the head like a good doggy and told him to go away. That's what happened. I didn't know this. I'm learning this for the first time.
Well, they did it to you too, but you just had to spend probably $20 million more than James spent.
Yeah.
And 17 years. And they do it to anyone who gets in their way because that's the way the system works. It's a fake justice system. But James, what was your impression when you heard this went? And is literally on the docket, Justice Roberts has to at least himself look at this and determine what to do with it. And if he does give it to his other Supreme Court justice members, or if he pushes it properly to Homeland Security, or he pushes it properly to Vice President Pence, we might actually have a moment where we bring to the light of day the truth about election rigging. So how did you feel when you heard that your efforts somehow got into the Supreme Court? James?
Did we lose James? Hey, Jim.
I think you're quite right, Michael. I think that this is a clarion call for the Second American Revolution. And James, we got to thank you, and we got to thank you, Michael, and all the people that have been involved with the two of you and all the efforts that you've put out for this, because we're going to keep pushing this. We're going to be talking with Christopher Strunk later today, and perhaps other people who were involved in writing this writ of mandamus that reached up into the